This is the Frontline Focus Podcast, a show dedicated to those in the field focusing on their development as the key to the construction industry's progress. This is Season 1. Our focus will be on the hidden cost of safety. In each episode, we will talk with a construction industry professional to hear their thoughts about how to shift the frontline focus. All right. We're at it again. We've got the microphones going. We've got the cameras on. We were recording again. Ben Sleeman, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. You've got some really interesting stories and a perspective that we can't wait to share with the construction industry. And I'm joined, as always, by my tag team partner, Mr. Gabe Guetta. How are you doing today, sir?
Good, Rob. I'm doing good. We're just coming off the heels of the holiday recording today, so it's nice to be back in action.
You know, I've seen a few people post in the past couple days of there's this weird space-time continuum warp from around December 24th until today, which is January the 2nd. I'm like, there's this weird stuff happening, and I'll throw another layer on it for you guys to comment on. It's not just that we take 2 days or maybe 3 or 4 days out of the schedule between Christmas and New Year. When it happens on Wednesday, like that every 7-year weird thing, like that definitely messes up people's time-space continuum. Like, what day is today?
Yeah. And the funny thing is, Ben, I don't know if this still happens, but when I was in construction running the window installation company, it was every single year for the freaking 14 years that I was in the industry. It's like, yep, no, we're pushing through the holidays. We're all working. We're go, get people on site. And then you get people ready and no, it's a ghost town. Nobody's there. Some people show up, some people do some stuff, but it's like the whole world just shuts down. Is it still happening like that in construction?
Yes.
Or are people actually doing soft closes?
New schedules do not account for holidays. They
Right.
They don't exist. So
Yeah.
pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, same thing. You know what's funny, Ben? With our software now, we have a pulse on the field of construction. We see, because most companies that use our product are doing hazard or pre-trip, whatever you're going to do. Before you start work, you're doing some type of safety. We see the data points of the busy times. Like when we show like investors like our data around just traffic, they're like, what are those things up and down? I'm like, oh, those are the weekends. And they're like, oh, so it goes away. And then they're like, well, what happened over here? It's like, yeah, that's Christmas. It goes from tens of thousands of people to nobody for a week and a half. And we're like, the industry can't say that they work over the holidays anymore. It's just proven through data that the whole place shuts down. So
Yeah. No, that's true. And it probably varies a little bit between the countries. You'll see a few more dips in Canada than you would in the US.
Yep. And yeah, there's not as big of a dip in Thanksgiving in Canada as there is in the US. I've started to take off American Thanksgiving, Ben. I've started to take it off because I love football. So me and there's about 20 of friends of mine that I've known since high school. We take the Thursday off completely and we just go to a pub and watch football all day. I've started to celebrate. Yeah. Well, Ben, I'm excited for this conversation. I know, we've known each other for 5 years now, almost
Going
6,
on
probably.
6. Yeah.
Yeah, going on 6. And we've had a lot of conversations. You started as, a customer, one of our first customers, one of our first, absolutely, definitely our biggest customer out of the gates. And we've gone through, you signed up with Salus when all we had was a mobile app. You took a risk, you took a bet, you made a bet on us. And we went through some stuff together, right? But that's the type of stuff that builds strong relationships too. We could go on for hours telling stories, but the amount of times we've been on the phone together, I'm thinking to myself, man, we should be recording this. The stuff we're talking about, people need to hear about.
Well, I was glad you didn't record most of it, but we're here now.
Yeah, I know. There's a double-edged sword there. I know when we talked about getting you on the podcast, we were like, well, can we release this? And you know what, Ben? We don't know. We won't know until the end of this if we can release this.
We'll let you know in about 30 minutes if it's releasable or not.
Yeah, if not, this is just for the three of us to have a good conversation to keep in the archives. But Ben, let's start with hey, I know you well. Rob got to know you a little bit off before the podcast started, but you got an interesting story on how you got to where you are today. let everyone else know, like, what was your journey to get to the position you're in? What position are you in? I don't want to ruin any of it for people. So just go.
Yeah, so I saw this ad in Craigslist in 2015 that was an advertisement for a small tools mechanic, and I had a background in commercial heavy duty mechanics, fixing trucks and trailers for years. I was looking at my options to go back to school, and I saw this ad, and I thought, well, that sounds like a fairly job. I'll throw in an application. So I went down to LMS's yard, and as I'm walking in there, I'm watching this just incredible yard working at a pace that I had never seen before. And I walk in, and they described the job to me, and it's basically, we have 100 of the job sites. We've got about 650 workers at the time, all in the field. Every one of these sites has, torch sets, saws, little generators, things of that nature. So the job was basically to drive around to each job site, make sure everybody had what they needed, and I would fix 90% of everything on the tailgate of my truck. So I would just, pull up. They would bring me whatever was broken. I had my little toolkit, and I would start to repair everything for them. And so I was doing that job, and
Hey, and what does LMS do? Just so for people that don't know.
LMS is a reinforcing steel group that fabricates, transports, and installs reinforcing steel and projects varying from size to, the Petula Bridge all the way down to doing somebody's driveway. There's very few jobs in the world that we will not go at. I would venture to say that 70% of the Vancouver skyline was put up by LMS. Infrastructure, commercial, residential, all the towers that you see in Vancouver, the huge concentration of towers that you see in downtown, the Brentwood development, Surrey, vast majority of those have been contracted to LMS with very long-term clients. Ron McNeil and Ivan Harmony started this company 38 years ago, and it has grown from 2 guys in a pickup truck to 1,000 workers in 3 provinces and 2 countries. So we're in California, we're in British Columbia, Alberta. We have done some out of province jobs across Canada, but our concentration is BC, Alberta, California.
Yeah, that's an incredible story of growth. Yeah, so back to the so your truck side fixing things.
Yeah, so I'm driving around and I'm doing things, and a friend of mine had posted on Facebook at the time the course, and it was occupational health and safety degree at SFU, and it made me curious. So I clicked on the link, and I saw that this course could all be taken at nighttime. It was very reasonably priced, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to sign myself up for this and further my knowledge and see where I can get to it. And so I went ahead and did that. I attended one class, and I walked into work, and my foreman at the time says, "Hey, I heard you're taking these safety classes. The safety manager really needs some help. He's a little bit overwhelmed, because you're already going around to all the job sites. Maybe good opportunity for you to learn." I said, "Yeah, no, that sounds great, right?" 3 days later, they let the safety manager go, unbeknownst to me. And I sat down and had lunch with one of the owners, and he says, "So do you think you can do it?" And I remember looking at him, and I said, "Do what?" And he says, "Do you think you can manage safety?" I said, "Well, I've taken one class of 12 courses that I need to take. I'm not sure." And basically said, "I think you'll be all right. We're going to try this out." And so sink or swim. So it was, I got thrown into it. I had been working. I come from a blue collar family. My dad was an electrician. My brother's a carpenter. My other brother machinist. Construction and industry were not unfamiliar to me. I had a background in mechanics myself. So, going into it, I think I had a much different perspective on things because I wasn't a safety person. I was a construction person taking safety courses. And so a lot of the time when I was approaching these guys, not a lot of the time, almost 99% of the time, I was learning from them. I was not going in there and telling them this is unsafe. To be truthful, I didn't even know if it was unsafe a vast majority of the time. I was just asking the obvious questions of, yeah, wow, that's an awfully tall rebar column you just stood. Is that going to fall over? And I get the, no, it's good. Okay, it's good, right? So it was out of learning, and looking back on it, having this conversation, I think that's one of the reasons I got accepted, right? Is I did not go in there with this attitude of, I'm the safety guy, and whip out my wallet card kind of thing to show them that, I'm in charge now. It wasn't like that at all. And so we learned a lot together. And so I did that portion of it for a few years, and then I got the opportunity to move to California. LMS had started a division down here. At the time, without anybody really knowing much of it, the thought was, well, you have Cal OSHA, right? It's sort of known as this monster of safety. We really need somebody to go down there and make sure this thing gets set up correctly. And so at that point, I moved down and I started running safety in America. We got up to somewhere around 450 workers down here. So it was fairly busy, and that lasted for about a year and a half. And then one day I got a phone call asking me if I would come back to Vancouver and down with them. And ownership sat down with me and said, I'll give them a lot of credit. Most owners, I feel like, didn't really see the big picture in terms of safety moved light years ahead of where construction was moving in that time period. All of a sudden, WorkSafe came out of the gate swinging, and they were trying to whip an industry into shape that frankly didn't have that much warning. It was kind of safety off for, a long time. And then all of a sudden they put all this horsepower behind it. So the owner sat down with me and said,
and were you in that middle of that transition? Were you, when you started, because that's why I started Salus, was when I was running that company. It was wear hard hats, steel toe boots, get the job done. If it's dangerous, do it on a day when no one's around. And then it changed to like, okay, prove you're actually safe. Where's your safety program, your manual, prove they're following it. Were you brought in after that kind of transition where LMS was already had built a safety manual, starting to get compliance? Or was it like, no, we're failing there, we're feeling it, then go solve it?
They had a program to meet compliance. What we did not have was an effective in the field safety program that the guys actually understood.
Right.
We had a 380-page manual.
Right.
We had a whole bunch of work procedures that nobody really, understood. They weren't incorrect, but they were written to satisfy if an officer asked you if you had a safe work procedure. But they certainly were not written in ways workers could understand. So I would say it was kind of in the middle of that.
Gotcha.
They had already gone for their core audit, and then frankly, at that time, the core audit was an administrative audit. It really wasn't effective, in my opinion, at gauging whether the field safety was being effective at all. So yeah, it was in the middle of that. And when they had called me back, they basically said, the growth of the company is huge now. You got to understand, with every division, we have 65 people working just in a heavy fabrication yard, bending, cutting, using overhead cranes. We have all of our trucking is internal. We have a trucking division. We've got 4 millwrights in these machines. We have lockout, tagout procedures. So it was a monster. It went far beyond basic field safety. And so the conversation was, what do we need to do as a company to formalize this thing so it reaches across groups of companies? And basically, well, we need to form a department. Not an indie department. I don't like saying that. But a department within LMS whose job was strictly to focus on safety. Now, the biggest caveat to that was I was never going to form a department, again, using that word, independent of operations, because in my view, it would never work. Your operation, your safety are the same thing. And I think in a lot of companies, this has been said to me several times, well, the safety department doesn't care about production. Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Of course you care about production. The idea of safety is to ensure that production can move at the speed that you need it to while you're done safely. It's not our job to slow production down. So I will really give the owners credit. They had a vision. I was lucky enough that they thought that, I would be the guy to do that job. And it gave me the room to work with operations to do that were effective. And one of those things, of course, was I went through my first core audit with paper. Now, at the time, over 130 job sites, 650 field workers. And the first time I did a core audit using just paper, I was like, I never want to do this again. This was the most terrible thing I've ever done. So we started searching for a digital platform. And I honestly don't remember how we sort of stumbled across Salus, but I do remember speaking to at least a dozen of these people trying to sell me safety software. And Gabe, I think it was you that I spoke with in the second phone call. And I remember thinking, this guy doesn't sound like a tech guy. He doesn't sound like a tech guy. And so it sort of sparked my interest more. Everybody else that I had been speaking to at that time, it was literally like, well, look, we've developed this software and there's a safety module in it. And it was, no, we are too big of a company. We're too complex. I need something that just focuses on safety. And the product that you had at that time, frankly, was not like anything else that was out there, right? We had looked at it and it's like, okay, this feeds the information of 1,000 workers in 2 countries into a singular place. And a lot of our discussions from there were, well, how do we sort it? How do we make sense of all this information?
Yeah.
So I'll fast forward to the following year when I did the core audit for Alberta and BC. So when I did the paper audit for core, it took me 3 days to document review with the auditor. When I did my first year digitally with Salus, I gave the core auditor a password and I sat beside him and I said, okay, what do you want to see? And we got it done in 3.5 hours. Now, I don't think I've ever seen an auditor so happy ever to be auditing something because, it just speeds things along. And it stops that nervousness of, where's that file? Where's that job? Okay, I got to find 12.
We have it.
Right?
Yeah.
It was just a couple of clicks. So, all of those things, looking back on it now, they all kind of converged at once. You had safety sort of light years ahead of where construction was. You had ownership group that recognized the need for looking at this thing differently. And then you had technology coming in to manage all of these construction group companies. And all three of those merging at once, I think the timing couldn't have been better.
Yeah. So for starters, I remember that first conversation and I remember getting off the phone and I was like, talk to Robbie, our co-founder and CTO. I'm like, I like this guy. It's like, we were swearing on the phone within 10 seconds of the conversation. I was like, Robbie, I have no idea if we're going to close this deal or not, but that was fun. And, I mean, I didn't know how to sell anything really at that point. I still don't, but that's why I'm not allowed to sell anymore. But
I sold it though. Kind of what sold it.
Yeah, right. Just blatant honesty. Like, Ben, we have a mobile app. I don't really know how it works, but this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that a great background. So I want to dig into a few things here. So you've kind of brushed over this, and it doesn't sound easy, but it sounds easier than it was. Like, hey, iron workers, when I was like people that work in construction know there's different personas on a job site. Some of the roughest and toughest people, not some of the roughest and toughest people on the job site are iron workers, right?
That's
like
correct.
the reinforcing rod busters is what we call them. How did you, especially at that time, like we're talking about a transition in health and safety where you're trying to get a compliance level of safety done in construction, which I went through with window installers, which was insane. And I had maybe 80 to 100. You had 650 at the time. In a year, you get core. And then it doesn't just stop there. Like what I've seen from LMS is you're getting field level. You've gotten and you progressively got more and more field level adoption and buy into safety, but it was in a different way. It wasn't like so many companies, safety comes on site, everyone stops working. There's a text message that goes out. There's so much animosity between the departments. They're stuck between ownership, the field, and just no one likes them. You did this in a completely different way. And I still to this day, I kind of know, I get it. You're from the field, but tell us how did How did you do it? Like,
Well,
what was the secret sauce here?
I mean, I don't know that there was any one formula. There was certainly resistance to it in a lot of different areas. But the biggest thing with these guys is I don't believe in babying people, right? I believe that, as you say, these are some of the roughest, toughest, and smartest guys that you will ever encounter. They know their job. So I approach them with a different degree of respect. I don't approach them as if I'm an authority. I'm here to talk to you about this. And we need to approach this together because, one of the things I would always say to the guys is, look, there's two ways to write a safe work procedure. You can do it with me and it'll be the way that you want to do it. Or you can tell me to F off and I'm going to write it and you're not going to like the way that I write it because I don't know enough to write it so that I don't hinder what you're doing or make it more difficult. It's in your best interest to work with me. So that's how we developed a lot of what we do is it was in conjunction, right? And then you get a little bit of resistance here and there, but I'll tell you what, nothing sparks people's ability to converse with you more than getting them to talk about something they know about and something they love.
Right.
Right. So if I'm standing on site, yeah, the guy is annoyed that I'm there. The crane's flying overhead. Somebody's yelling at him on the radio. He doesn't have time for me until we start actually talking about what he's doing and how he's accomplishing these things. And that really, once they start getting the idea that you are really listening and you're not listening to tell them that they're wrong, right? So 90% of the time, a safety person will approach somebody, and as they are explaining what they're doing, the safety person will go, well, you cannot step right there. That's unsafe. We need to stop that right there, right? Don't stop them. Let them explain from the bottom all the way up to the top of what their process is. Write it down, and then approach it from a different angle of, okay, I understand why you do it like that. These three ideas. Do any of them sound stupid? Do any of them sound better? Let's talk our way through that, right? And they will engage with you. So that was sort of one way that I approached it. The second way that I approached it is I am fair burn. And what I mean by that is if I have trained you or somebody else has trained you and you have been given knowledge, when I approach you about you doing something that is outside of the lines, where you know that you're breaking policy, you know that you're breaking procedure, and you have been informed of what that procedure is, I don't have a lot of mercy in the sense that you will be sent home that day. Now, I always tell people before we get to that point, look, I'm going to treat you like an adult. You're a professional. You're here to do a job, right? You know that this job will be done this way. If I see you doing it another way, simply because you decided you wanted to do it that way, you will be sent home. There will be discipline for that. And it might seem a little bit harsh because safety has delved into sort of the human condition and how do we get people to, but there's no way to get somebody
Can
to
be
listen.
done without the stick, Ben? Because this is where it comes like,
No.
this is the truth view, right? Like,
So
where's the balance in that? Because I agree, like, think about driving. To this day, I think the number one cause of death is still distracted driving. Drunk driving is now, I think, number 3, at least in British Columbia. For a while, it was like before there was rules around texting and driving, it was ridiculous the amount of people that were dying or getting significantly injured. Nobody was changing. I was texting and driving. I was talking on the phone constantly. Then all of a sudden there's a law, not only a law for heavy fine, but like 2 strikes and you're basically out. Like they'll remove your license. And all of a sudden it starts to drop. So I believe that there is no, like, we're human beings. We're just always going to try and take the fastest route from point A to point B. So how do you balance that? How much of the stick before you become the cop and you kind of kill that culture that you were just talking about creating?
You cannot be the cop without getting the buy-in to the program and without providing the necessary training that people, right? So it's not enough to just go out there and be a cop. You have to focus the majority of what you're doing on training these guys and getting alike thinking across the crews. Let me put it to you a different way. I do not believe that the majority of the population has a tangible fear that they are going to go into work and die.
Right. I agree.
Because you wouldn't have people dying on the job site, right?
Complacency,
we all have a tangible fear that if we do not follow protocols, that there will be discipline for that. And so it is more tangible to somebody, right? That if I knowingly break safety protocol, that I can lose my job or be suspended, or that if I ignore it, I might die. Nobody thinks they're going to die. And so the complacency of that, to me, is where the danger lies. And so when I say I'm fair but firm, it's because if you're on a crew of 20 guys and somebody does get sent home or does get terminated for violating safety protocols, it's a reminder to everybody that these rules are standing and they will be enforced. It's not like you out there enforcing rules that haven't been developed with the field, right? You are enforcing rules that the field had input on. But we focus a lot on the human condition and, it's fair to suspend somebody. And in my view, that is big part of the problem, right? We have developed an aside to safety, and it's an industry of talking about safety.
Right.
As I sit here on a podcast with the two of you, right?
Right.
Which I have
Yep.
resisted doing, let's be honest, for quite some time, right? Because I believe in operational safety, and I do think that, things like conventions, and all these other things that facilitate the conversation of safety have a use. However, we really have created this side industry of people in love with hearing themselves talk about safety and not actually talking about what is effective on a job site. So again, in my view, I've always approached it with what is more tangible, that you can be disciplined for breaking protocols or that you would die going in.
Do you feel like safety is starting to alienate itself because of that? I like that comment. I liked a lot of what I just heard there. But one of the things that I've also noticed as well, like, hey, I have a lot of respect for safety professionals, and I think we're definitely a safer industry than we were when I started working in it, 15, 20 years ago. But I do believe that, human nature is to create an echo chamber. When I go to conferences, safety conferences, whatever it may be, the full goal of safety is for people to go home safer at the end of the day, right? Like to not get
Right.
hurt, typically there's not a single trade person at any of these conferences. And what I see happening is safety is starting to alienate itself into its own world, and there's less. I'm not saying that's maybe a broad statement, and that's not fair to everyone. Like you're doing it differently. But a lot of the times it is starting to remove that understanding of like, what is it actually like in the field? It's not just safety.
Yeah.
When I went from the field working to being a manager, you forget. When I talk to people about what it's like on a job site, it's like, yeah, well, that's all great on paper, but it's minus 25 degrees. A pen freezes. You have to torch a slab just to get the ice off before you can work. And by the way, there is no heat in the building, right? So
Right.
throw all that and like the reality of like, okay, like you said, that procedure that says checks all the legal boxes for safety is literally unattainable in the field, and it just won't be done.
It's not realistic. Part of my hesitation when it comes to things like the safety conventions and all the different things that facilitate the conversations, you got to be a little bit careful that we don't turn into realtors here, right? Where all we're doing
Right.
is self-congratulating ourselves for how many awards we've handed out and how smart we all think we are. Safety is a nuts and bolts things, and that's why I always say we do operational safety. And it might sound a little bit cheesy, but following the safety protocols is as important as making sure that the installation is done correctly.
Right.
And so when you approach it from the view of, would an apprentice get in trouble if he installs something incorrectly that's going to take another 8 hours to disassemble and put back in? Absolutely, he would, right?
Yeah.
And that level of trouble that he gets from the foreman is going to be quite high.
Yeah.
Why do we treat safety differently, right? If the foreman went there and showed you how to install this, and the apprentice nods and says, I understand, I don't need any help, I can do this on my own, and then he does it wrong, there's a consequence for that. I run safety sort of in that same manner, right? We explain it, we go through it, everybody understands it. I say, do you need any more clarification? No, we got it. Okay. So the application of how we are teaching people is the same way, in my view, as we are teaching people their craft, right? Because as you're merging those two things, they eventually become this journeyman that only knows how to do it with the safety protocols in mind. You have to get it at the inset, right?
That is a good point. It's when you shift that. I've always, like, people are always saying, oh, quality and safety. There's a lot of companies that have modules that are the same, whether it's software, the departments run in lockstep. I've always looked at it as like the actual process is like, oh, it's similar forms, similar checkbox. But the way you're describing it, you're right. Like if you were, and I think globally, it doesn't matter if you're in construction or not. If somebody were to put something together and says put 10 screws in, and somebody puts 3 screws in, moves on, and then also scratches something on the like a panel, a finished panel on the way out, and everyone's like, oh, that's fine. They're not going to get in trouble. Just talk to them about it. And it's like, no, they're going to get in trouble. Like you got to put the 10 screws in. If you scratch it, you're in trouble. And that's what makes sure it doesn't happen in the future. But for some reason around health and safety, you're right. There's a delicate aspect around the way that we handle it. Some don't. Some like I think it's a pendulum, Ben. At the beginning, it was heavy enforcement, like Rob, when you first started in health and safety, it was the stick. That was only the stick, right?
It was more like a spike club with nails in it, and sometimes a flamethrower.
Right. And that created problems as well. And now we're swinging this pendulum, as humans do, so far in the other direction, where it's like it's just as ineffective.
Well, and that's why I say fair but firm. I am not suggesting that I walk around like some sort of safety cop, nor do I train my people to go out there and act in that same way. What I mean by fair but firm is just that. So if you've got a guy working at height and he's fully harnessed in, harness is on correctly, he's clipped off with his lanyard, and you walk up to that individual and you say, hey, why are you climbing this wall? There's a scissor lift right over there, right? So let's just say the second or third year apprentice thing. He says, well, I went to go get the scissor lift because I know we're supposed to use the scissor lift anytime we can. Timing, but when I went over there, the carpenter said, screw you, I'm going to go use this over here. And I couldn't get it. And my foreman was getting mad at me that I needed to get the job done. And so I just decided to get it done. So in that case, no, we're not sending the guy home for that, right? We're not suspending the guy for that. What we are going to do is we're going to talk to his supervisor, right? And to figure out how we avoid a situation like that, where we just put a worker in needless danger, right? Just because he got in a scenario where he didn't know what to do. And so you have to work your way back. 90% of the time, it comes down to the poor man would have said, why didn't you just tell me? I would have told that carpenter to F and wouldn't take the scissor lift, right? But we're moving so fast on a job site. You have to be fair but firm. So the conversation with that person is, okay, I don't want to see you on the wall like that again. This is what I want to see you do next time. This is your learning moment, if you will. Now, I go back to that job site 2 weeks later, and I see that individual climbing on a wall, and the scissor's still sitting over there. The conversation's going to be different.
It's going to be different.
So this is what it elevates, and it's all this context. Every time you hand it a warning, you have to look at the context of why you're doing it.
Ben, a couple more questions before we wrap up here. One is, you are one of the few people I get the opportunity to talk to that's managing safety in 2 different countries. US and Canada, similar in many ways, different in many ways. Is it different in many ways in the way that you have to manage health and safety down to the field level worker? Or is it the same?
Yeah, so there are certainly vast differences between Canadian safety approaches and American safety approaches. Interestingly, if you were to take the administrative safety that companies apply and apply Canada to the US is about 20 years behind. They are far, far behind vast majority of the general contractors at least in British Columbia. Definitely in Alberta, where they apply more of the oil sands, safety administration jobs. But the interesting thing about it is BC and Alberta are so top heavy on the administrative processes and having CSOs on site and having all these other mechanisms in place that I do find on the American side, because it is freer of all those things, they actually get the work done just as safely.
Right.
And without as much hindrance and without as much friction. So people rise to the occasion more often than not. They feel like they can do what made most sense to make something safe without having a CSO looking over their shoulder and saying, well, that's not quite safe enough. And so, I listened to a show the other day. It was interesting with Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And he was describing when he started that show, Dirty Jobs, that he was sitting through all these orientations for all those terrible jobs that he did, right? And he says, for the first about a year and a half, nobody ever got hurt, and we were paying attention, and everything was great. And it goes after a year and a half, I don't know what happened. We started breaking fingers. We started getting, no major injuries, but minor injuries on the site. He says, looking back on it, we stopped listening, right? Because it got to the point where we couldn't listen even if we wanted to anymore. And so I guess where I'm going with that is on the American side of it, there is a little more freedom to develop the way that you want to do it without a safety expert, if you will, on your back trying to tell you what to do. And on the Canadian side of the border, when you have somebody whose sole job, or at least what they think their job is to catch you doing something unsafe, that's where you get those vast differences. So I do not find that the injury rates are vastly different. I think they're actually a little bit lower in America, despite the fact that they have less safety protocols.
Interesting. Do you feel that safety is working, or the way in which safety is being done is working? And are we going in the right direction?
No, we're absolutely not. We are, especially in the world of general contractors, we have moved into this weird world. How do we push liability down and just pass it off to whoever basically ends up on the rung of that ladder? We have lost our collaborative approach of how we go about things and make a multi-employer work site safer for everybody. You have all these opposing safety opinions on the vast majority of sites where everybody is just saying, that's not my job to assist you to be safer, right? You guys got to figure that out on your own. Now, it's not all. There are some general contractors out there that do a great job of facilitating all the trades together.
Right.
But in general, the idea from the general contractor side is just we have to protect the general contractor and make sure we can never be blamed for anything. And that approach is causing huge tension points on most job sites. And so there's light at the end of the tunnel with some of that stuff, and it's relationship built, right? The longer we've worked with the general contractor, the better that relationship goes, the better that understanding becomes, the more collaborative the approach. BC is a very, very busy market, and you have a lot of new coming into that. And their approach is simply, we don't want to get blamed for everything. So we need to get back to common sense. How do we work together and make things safer? And we need to stop talking to a degree about how we all feel about safety. Safety doesn't have much of a feeling. It's either safe or it isn't. So that's what I personally would like to see more of. And when I say these things, I am certainly not talking about the mental health issues that people in construction experience, the substance abuse issues that we see on construction sites. That is a separate issue. I am talking about the nuts and bolts of construction. We certainly need to keep a focus on mental health. That is a major player when it comes to safety across the board, not just in construction. But that is a separate conversation that we need to have from actual nuts and bolts operational safety on the site every day.
Ben, I think that's a good way to wrap this up. Hey, Rob,
Absolutely. Ben, thank you for sharing your stories and your insights from the field, man. It's a very unique perspective that you're bringing that I think a lot of companies and a lot of safety pros need to hear, man. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Yeah, and no sugarcoating. That's what we need to hear more of. Just what do people think? Because the reality is what's going to fix the problem. Idealistic approaches, unfortunately, will not work in construction and safety. It just does it work or does it not? Is it solving the problem or is it not? We got to stop.
You should have named the episode "No Sugarcoating."
Yeah, well, we might change it just like right now.
Well, listen, thanks for having me, and it's nice to have an open conversation about it, and hopefully we can have more of these in the future.
I agree, man. I think there's maybe we'll get you up on a panel somewhere, or maybe in person. Me and you can do a little live presentation somewhere, or a conversation somewhere.
How did I know that was coming, Gabe? I knew that was coming after this.
Well, you give me one. I'm gonna just keep pulling on that, Ben.
That's right.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Good stuff. Well, Ben, thank you again for joining us today and sharing those thoughts. Gabe, thanks you for being with me today on this awesome conversation, guys. It's been good stuff. I think that's all the time we got for today. So with that, we'll call that a wrap. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Frontline Focus Podcast, powered by Salus. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast player or leave us a comment to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep moving safety forward.